Imagine a town that spent centuries hating a monster, but now spends its holidays building a massive, heavy sculpture of it to carry through the streets. I mean, usually when a community is traumatized by a creature that nearly wiped them out, they don't build a 350-kilogram effigy of it just for the fun of it. But the residents of Tarascon in southern France do exactly that. In the past, this costume was so large and cumbersome that it often injured people in the crowd, sometimes even breaking bones. And yet, the locals didn't seem to mind the physical risk. They were too busy recreating a scene where the monster is tied up and led through the city in a parade. It is a very strange way to celebrate. For those who don't know the story, the town is actually named after this monster. And by the end of this, you'll understand why a simple strip of cloth was more powerful than a legion of knights. To understand the terror, you have to look at the geography of southern France, specifically the Bouches-du-Rhône department in the Provence region. This is where the Rhône River flows, a massive, muddy artery of water that defined the cities of Arles and Avignon. Now, back in the 1st century, this wasn't some kind of sunny postcard landscape. It was a dangerous, unpredictable river. Between Avignon and Tarascon, there was a route essential for merchants, tourists, pilgrims, and soldiers. But, and here is where it gets interesting, the Rhône River region became a death trap. The Tarasque, also known as the Tarasque, was a chimera of French origin that lived in the river, and it didn't just hunt, it ate everything. Anyone who attempted to cross the river was basically just a snack. Now, there's a long-standing debate about the name. Some say the monster gave the town its name, but it's more likely that the Tarasque's name is based on the town of Tarascon. Interestingly, the town's name might have come from Toriscus, a Gaulish tyrant who was supposedly slain by Hercules. It's easy to forget that the Rhône wasn't always a tourist route. It was a place where things disappeared. The river's power is still felt today. For instance, the crypt of St. Martha's Church in Tarascon has been flooded multiple times over 2,000 years. When the water rises, it can reach 3 to 4 meters inside the tomb, submerging the sarcophagus and the relics of St. Martha. That is roughly the height of a professional basketball hoop, filled entirely with river mud and cold water. This river was the primary hunting ground for the Tarasque, a beast feared by the people of Provence. The landscape was a muddy, misty riverbank where the armored bulk of a monster lived in the silt, and the people lived in constant fear of being eaten. Now, let's talk about the creature. Imagine a beast that doesn't fit into any single animal kingdom. The Tarasque is a fearsome monster with a mix of animal traits. She was a female, described as being bigger than an ox, fatter than a buffalo, and longer than a horse. Her anatomy was a bit of a logistical nightmare for anyone trying to survive. She had the head and jaws of a lion, with teeth as sharp as a sword. In some reports, she even had tusks. To protect herself, she wore an armored hide, a large turtle-like shell with massive scales and sharp spikes. This hard back rose above the surface of the river, making her look like a cross between a prehistoric turtle and a dragon. Moving this bulk required 6 short legs with bare paws. She had a horse's mane with bristled hairs and sharp-pointed scales that ran down her spine. Then there was the tail of a serpent, a long snake-like appendage that ended in a poisonous scorpion-like sting. She wasn't just a land-based threat, she was an excellent swimmer and was often called half-fish. This amphibious monster of Tarascon was part beast, part reptile, and part fish, with a long tail like a nightmare pulled from the Rhône. But the most terrifying part, the part that really gets me, was what happened when she opened her mouth. According to Pseudo-Rabanus, she had poisonous breath that manifested as a pestilential smoke with sulfurous sparks. Her head was surrounded by a blue cloud pierced by bolts of red lightning, and she roared and whistled. She was a savage head with wide jaws, terrible teeth, and claws on her feet. Her back was over 1.8 meters high. When she emerged from the river, she didn't just hunt, she carried a lethal infection of terror. This was not a fish, and it was not a turtle. It was the Tarasque. Tracing the lineage of the beast is where things get genuinely strange. According to Pseudo-Marcella, the Tarasque was not just a random mutation of the river, but a descendant of the biblical Leviathan and a monstrous bull named Balkan, who lived in the forests of Galicia. Now, this particular pairing is a biological impossibility, but the legend says they produced the Tarasque, also known as the Bonacho or Onacus. It didn't stay in Spain. The creature traveled by sea from Galicia to the Rhône region, bringing its appetite for terror with it. Some versions of the story, however, suggest a different progenitor. They claim that Tarasque is the result of a creature called Lagos. Lagos was described as a creature resembling a bison or rhinoceros that could kill people and breathe fire. In some accounts, the Onacus, or the Bonacon, could even launch burning excrement to defend itself. I mean, the idea of a bison-like creature breathing fire and launching burning dung is a very specific aesthetic, and the Rhône riverbank was the most convenient place for the most absurdly armored creature in history to settle down. Saint Martha arrived in Tarascon without an army, a sword, or any fear. She didn't come as a conqueror, but as a refugee. Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, along with 2 other unnamed Marys, had fled Palestine and Judea, escaping persecutions following the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. They landed in Provence, bringing with them a faith that was essentially a new kind of currency in a region paralyzed by fear. Martha didn't just stop a monster, she spent her time preaching and converting the local population of Tarascon to Christianity. She was described as being courteous and gracious, which likely helped her efforts. Having accompanied Jesus during the Calvary and the resurrection, she carried an authority that felt weightier than steel. Before she even reached the river beast, she had already established a presence in the region. In Avignon, she performed a miracle by reviving a child who had drowned in the Rhône River. It was a simple act of survival that set the stage for her encounter with the Tarasque. Today, the memory of this woman is physically anchored in France. The St. Marthe Royal Collegiate Church was built in the 11th and 12th century to honor her. The church contains a crypt holding her relics, serving as a reminder that the city eventually named St. Martha as their patron saint after the city was liberated from the monster. Anyone who tried to save the town of Tarascon was essentially volunteering for a dessert menu. The beast sank and devoured ships on the river, while simultaneously attacking hikers in the forest. It became a local rule of survival. Travelers crossing the Rhône should not venture into the marshes of Tarascon to avoid being eaten. The river was simply not a place for a casual stroll. Armed men, hunters, and what the records call brave fools attempted to stop the monster, but no weapons could defeat it. Some tried a barrage of stones, while others relied on their heaviest armor. They were impervious to weapons, and neither knights nor kings could find a way through that shell. Each failure only made the legend stronger and gave the beast more power. Eventually, the villagers grew tired of playing targets. They built siege weapons and large catapults to throw boulders at the dragon, but the dragon shell resisted every attack. Spears and boulders were essentially just a light massage for the creature's impenetrable hide. Because of Saint Martha of Bethany didn't seek out the monster. She simply arrived in the region. She was part of a group of first-century Christians expelled from the Holy Land who were set adrift on the Mediterranean Sea in boats without oars or sails. She walked alone into the mud and the rot. No one followed her. When she finally found the beast, it wasn't waiting for an ambush. It was simply about to devour a man. The creature was there, in the forests of Provence, preparing to eat a man who had already been strangled. But the most absurd part isn't how she stopped the beast, it's what she used to lead it home. That is where the prayer of the people and the simple faith of Martha became a weapon more effective than any catapult. Saint Martha didn't bring a sword, which is where the absurdity of the encounter begins. Instead, she tamed the monster using her faith and prayers. She simply threw holy water on the creature and showed it the wooden cross. As the holy water hit the creature's scales, the effect was immediate. Martha sprinkled the water on the Tarasque, causing the beast to weaken and its rage to bend into confusion. The monster's head dropped and it became subdued. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The Tarasque became paralyzed, lost its strength, and was no longer wild or angry. The predator that had devoured ships and men became as peaceful as a lamb. And then came the part that makes the narrator and me slightly concerned about animal training. Martha used a ribbon, a simple piece of fabric, her girdle, to lead the beast home. There is something deeply unsettling about a monster that just stops. There is a specific kind of absurdity in the image of a woman in first-century attire standing next to a massive armored river beast. The creature, which had previously devoured ships and terrified an entire region, now cowered, allowing Martha to bind it with her belt. She didn't use a heavy iron chain or a military-grade leash. She used a simple fabric girdle. This is where the logic of the legend shifts from horror to the ridiculous. A monster that resisted catapults and armored knights, a creature that lived in the river mud and smelled of rot, was now leashed like a common dog. Just a ribbon of cloth, a piece of her own clothing, used as a collar to lead the tamed beast back to Tarascon? The contrast is total. The beast's armored bulk is compared to the simple fabric of the girdle, and the legend describes the scene as if it were a routine walk with a pet. It is an image of complete submission, where the same thing that had killed dozens of people was now being led by a ribbon of cloth. The scene in Tarascon was likely absurd. A monster that had once sunk ships now peacefully followed Saint Martha into town, behaving like a hound on a leash. The Tarascane watched as this creature, once the source of their nightmares, was led by the neck, completely charmed. But the relief didn't last. The townspeople were not interested in the miracle of a tamed beast. Driven by fear and a desire for revenge, they saw not a pet, but a target. Despite Martha's warnings that the beast was subdued, the villagers attacked it with stones, spears, and blades. It was a chaotic scene. The creature, which had lost its strength and rage, was no longer attacking. Saint Martha was angry. She mourned the death of the Tarasque, and she stood among the ruins of the creature she had saved. She didn't offer a blessing to the victors. Instead, she lectured the townspeople on mercy and forgiveness. The people of Tarascon had their monster gone, but they had replaced a physical beast with a very human kind of cruelty. Written records of this encounter began to appear around the 12th century in Provence. The earliest known account is found in Avignon, and it was written between 1187 and 1212. This text, known as the Vita S. Marthae by Pseudo Marcella, became the blueprint for later writers. Figures like Vincent of Beauvais and Jacobus Ferragini, who authored the Golden Legend, based their versions of the story on the story by Pseudo Marcella. Beyond France, the story spread. A similar dragon legend exists in Spain, Portugal, and Latin American countries, likely influenced by the Tarasque. Over time, the legend evolved into a symbolic shorthand. The Tarasque came to symbolize the victory of good over evil, civilization over barbarism, and Christianity over pagan beliefs. In reality, the monster likely embodied the Rhône River itself. The river's sudden floods frequently scattered herds, submerged crops, and exampled the homes, and the legend was a way for people to confront that terror. The purpose of these festivals was originally to drive away demons and represent the evil of the Rhône River. Even the physical festival costume is changed for the sake of efficiency. To prevent the monster from swaying, the men carrying it were replaced by wheels. The monster's tail was also shortened to avoid hitting the population. The site of the legend remains a focal point for high-profile visitors. King Clovis is said to have visited St. Martha's tomb in the Church of Tarascon to seek healing for his back pain. King Louis IX, also known as Saint Louis, stopped in Tarascon to pay respects to the saints of Provence during his crusades. The town, which was previously known as Nerluc, was renamed Tarascon in memory of the feared and dangerous enemy. It is a strange choice of branding. You have a town that begged Saint Martha for miracles to save them from the Tarasque, and then they spent their final moments of relief using spears and stones to kill a creature that was already subdued. If you visit today, you will find the Tarasque is featured on the town's coat of arms. You can see the monster's image on church entrances, the stone statue at King René's castle, and on the official seals of the city. The people of Tarascon turned to prayer and St. Martha for help when they were terrified, but they chose the violence of the mob over the mercy of the saint. They renamed their home after the monster, and then they put it on their shield. It is a very flat, very concrete irony.